Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Knowledge Unbound. As a reminder, we are brought to you by the Rios Institute for Racially Just, Inclusive, Open STEM Education. I have a packed studio today. I have my website content manager. You can wave. It's all right. I got you. Adrian Lozano, wonderful undergraduate biology major, class of 2026. My always loyal and 3-language speaking producer, Mrs. Segev Amasai.
Actually, Brian, it's like 4 or 5.
No. See, it can't be 4 or 5. Either you speak 4 or you speak 5. That's not how
I like
language
to say
speaking...
it's 4.5 because I have a little bit of Portuguese in there, but
Okay, well,
it is what it is.
Have it in there is different to speaking it, all right? Anyway, you know I love you, and I'm jealous that you can speak so many languages. We're also joined by our guest for our intro, Kathie Klarreich, Executive Director of Exchange for Change, a wonderful nonprofit here in Miami, Florida, that does several things in prison education. We'll get into that later. Kathie, welcome.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Okay, no, thanks for coming out and thanks for doing this podcast live. We are going to, normally we record these intros separate. And so what I would do is I would kind of give you a little bit of a sneak peek preview about what we're going to talk about. But in this case, we are actually recording the intro live before we actually have the conversation. So I'm just going to get right to it. Welcome to Knowledge Unbound. So Kathie, and listeners will know this, right? This is episode 8. I generally don't like to introduce people, not because you're not worth introducing. It's just because you tell your own story. And your story is a long one. But I want you to start maybe from just tell us what you do right now with Exchange for Change, what it's about, who you've worked with, and what that journey has been like.
All right, so I'm not going to take up the entire podcast by the introduction, but that was kind of a mouthful. So I founded Exchange for Change just about 10 years ago with the idea of the incarcerated population telling their own story instead of the community, the media, film, social media, telling stories about them. And the idea is that everybody is better than the worst thing that they've ever done, regardless of whether or not you were caught and convicted and sentenced. And all of our programs inside correctional facilities have a writing component so that people increase their ability to be able to communicate better. But we have a 2-part mission, and the second part of the mission you're helping me fulfill, which is to bring the voice of the incarcerated out to the community, because it's no longer an us versus them or you versus me, right? It's an us situation. And so all of the components of the program are really to educate ourselves and our community about criminal justice and criminal justice reform.
So you say that all of your programs have a writing component. What are the other components of the program?
Self-esteem, self-advocacy, communication, creation of community inside. I think it's important to say that about 90% of the incarcerated population actually comes back outside, but probably close to half of our students have life sentences. So people say, well, why are you wasting your resources on people who will never come out? Because education's a human right, and they have just as much right as anyone else to improve their lives.
Nice. So tell us a little bit more about the writing component. So I know there are college faculty members who go into the prisons and they lead classes. I know that over time, or maybe even still now, I think you have writing exchange programs with college students. So for people who may have never heard of prison education or maybe heard of it and don't know what it entails, I think some detail around that could be helpful.
So I'll sort of explain the way our program is set up. So currently we are in 5 state correctional facilities, 1 juvenile residential center, and the county jail. Maybe 4 correctional centers, and we have no restrictions. If you want to take our class, you sign up, kind of like college. Like, here's our smorgasbord of courses. We go by semester. They're generally once a week for 2 hours. Fall and spring are about 12 to 14 weeks. Summer is shorter. And the range of classes is as diverse as the range of interests of the population, because in general, the incarcerated population is a microcosm of the world outside. So in addition to the more stereotypic, well-known genres of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, we teach from one of your FIU professors, writing as an exile experience, memoir, the trauma toolbox, which helps people identify what it is that triggers them and how to avert that trigger, which might have gotten them in the first place. Speech writing, commencement speeches, short stories, Shakespeare, science fiction, the whole gamut.
Yeah. How do the students, and I'm calling the prison population here students in this case, how do they respond to the instruction? And I'm trying to make that question broad, not just, okay, they come to the class, they take it and they're right, but the way you just described those classes, you're not just asking them to come and write, you're asking them to look inside and dig stuff out and work through emotions and psychologies that they may never have. And so I'm curious about that process and what it's like witnessing that process, witnessing them go through that process.
You know, I think I go back to the very beginning of when we first started this. So we started with one class at Dade Correctional Institution, and this, because it was a new program and the Department of Corrections was really skeptical about it, they handpicked the students. So inside prison, everybody has a job. So they picked the orderlies, and an orderly is a coveted position because it means you get out of the dorm, and let's say you're an orderly for education or for the chaplain. So you have a little bit of education. When we got those students to buy into the program, they then went out and talked to other students about the program. And if you appeal to the idea that you can go into the education building where it's air conditioned, okay, which I want to make this point.
Yeah.
Florida prisons are not air conditioned. So just as a sidebar, imagine what it's like in the summer in an open bay dorm with 64 other people and a big fan. So we use whatever we can to get them to the classroom. But then that's where the magic happens, is that one person starts to reveal something personal, and suddenly a bond is formed between that person and someone else. And then it takes on a life of its own. So we opened the door, and they just kept coming through. And what we saw happening is that there was this exchange among opposing gang members, for example, who talked about Shakespeare, and then they went out onto the compound and they continued the conversation. And then other gang members are like, hey, you know, what's going on between the Bloods and the Crips, right? And between the transgender community and people who had a reputation of being homophobic. So communities were starting to build, and it became popular to be cool in education. And that all has to do with trust inside the classroom.
How did the Department of Corrections respond over time?
Over time, I'd say by hell or high water, they've accepted it. Listen, we in some ways provide a service. Well, not in some ways. We provide a service that the Department of Corrections does not. I won't say cannot, but does not. Because up until about a year ago, almost nothing was required other than general education degree. So, and only the GED was available to people who had a certain length of sentence. You had a life sentence, you couldn't take any classes. They've since added more resources. So within the last year, we've seen more opportunities. But we've also grown. So this semester, Brian, we have about 350 students. We've trained over 100 facilitators, including many, many FIU professors and grad students. We've been able to bring inside elected officials and judges and state reps. And so I think the Department of Corrections recognizes the value, even if they fundamentally don't want eyes and ears inside to see what some of the things are that are going on. I think that in the best case scenario, they've accepted us.
Right. So I'm curious, and I know this is a question I'm sure you have gotten this question in the past, right? There's certainly some people out there who have a different view of how we should be responding to incarcerated peoples. to the extent where they question, why should we invest the resources that you're investing in literacy and writing and things like that. And I just wonder how you respond to them, because I'm sure people have asked you directly. I wonder what is your response to them, and not just respond to them as to why, but in ways that maybe gets them to see this process a little differently than they had before they asked you the question.
So I probably have several different ways to answer it. The easiest one, and the one that seems most rote, but not everybody's going to agree with, is that education is a human right. Just as health is a human right. So the punishment for committing a crime is that you're removed from society. But that's where the punishment should end. It shouldn't continue in the way that you're treated and your inaccessibility to some of the human rights. But on a more fundamental level, since the vast majority of people who are incarcerated are returning to our community, how would you like them to return? Would you like them to return after 25 years of being warehoused, or after 25 years of having access to education, new ways of thinking, the ability to develop skills that you would not have had an opportunity to otherwise? And it's so easy for us to look at people and think that they stay static, but we don't. And they are, for the vast majority, not the same people, especially those who've been in for decades. I mean, we have a lot of students who committed crimes in their early 20s. I don't want to defend anything that they've done, but they made terrible decisions. They left victims in their wake. They damaged a lot of families and a lot of communities. But 25 years later, they are not that same person. They have learned so much, and they are, because we've seen it now, we've been around for 10 years, they come back out into society, and they want to give back. And they're doing amazing things with the experience that they had.
Can you tell me a bit more about that? So I know you said earlier that 50% of the prisoners are in for life. But there's another 50%, right, who, like you said, may come out. Have you been able to keep in contact with some of the alumni of your program who've, re-entered society and done different things, right? What has seen that process?
Yeah, I want to say 50% of our students have a life sentence, but 90% of incarcerated people will return. We just happen to have a higher percentage of people because they can't get into any other program.
Right.
So, I mean, I have a great example, and I'm, very happy to say Ryan Moser, who is currently on our board, was formerly incarcerated, learned to develop his writing skills, became a journalist, has been published, a lot, is making a career now as a writer, and would not have been able to do that had he not had the opportunity to take writing classes.
Right.
Oh, God, we have so many examples of people who have come out, and, a lot of them say they're going to get in touch, and then they end up not getting in touch only because their lives take off. We have an FIU student who just opened up her own store. She became an entrepreneur, right? She studied psychology. She was a Spanish speaker. Her English wasn't that great. We've taught classes in Spanish. She graduated with, from FIU with a degree, and now she's got her own store up and running. So there are lots of really wonderful success stories. We don't have accurate statistics about who recidivates, who goes back inside, but our anecdotal is, I think we have maybe 5% of people who graduated. I'm not saying it's all our program, right? But they don't go back in versus the 50 to 60 after 5 or 8 years who end up going back inside.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about the students and even the professors who do this, because I think sometimes these conversations can get locked into, we go to help them, like we go to give them stuff, and they're the ones who need all the help. But in reading the writing of these students, and actually maybe what we want to do before that is talk to us a little bit about when you work with college students and they do a writing exchange. Tell us about that first.
Yeah, so that actually fills 2 parts of our mission. So let's say, what's a course you're teaching this semester?
Introductory biology.
Okay, so a little bit more difficult. Let's just say...
We write a lot, though.
All right, so your students and my students read the same thing on biology.
Uh-huh.
They take on pseudonyms so that their identity is protected. They write a response to what it is that they read, and then through us, they exchange papers.
Okay.
And then it becomes this semester-long conversation about an exchange of ideas about whatever the subject is, with some personal feelings and history mixed in, right? But it's not a pen pal exchange. It's not an idea of, this weekend I
You're
went
responding to the readings.
to the
right?
readings,
Yeah.
right? And with all due respect for college students, most of them don't write for pleasure, right? They write for a grade or they write an email, right? So when we ask them to write a letter, right, this is something kind of brand new. And a lot of the students come in thinking that they're going to, quote, educate their incarcerated partner. Whereas, sorry, but the incarcerated partner is a master at letter writing because it's their main form of communication. So what ends up happening is that they educate each other. So if the outside student sees something, confronts their own bias or prejudice that they didn't know they had, and our incarcerated students feel heard and seen and respected and valued. So it's a win-win on both sides.
Can you tell me a bit more about that process? Because I can see, and again, I don't want to be judgy of college students here, but I can see a college student initially thinking somebody in prison and thinking of all the things that got that person to prison. And we're going to do this process. And there is perhaps an automatic dehumanization of that individual. Maybe it's not explicit. When you've witnessed that college student change their framing of who they're communicating with, what have you seen in that process? And
Wow.
And I have a selfish reason for asking this, right? Like my hidden agenda of higher ed is for higher ed to do more than just teach content and subjects, right? For people to get into what the joy of being human is and to live beyond ourselves. And to the extent that what you're doing there can help with that, tell me what you've witnessed.
Oh my God, I have so many examples. Some are more obvious. So, for example, we had an FAU student whose father was a correctional officer. And despite being so clear about the guidelines of writing your partner, she continued to write about her in the third person. Like it was just, she couldn't address the you voice.
Right.
And her partner on the inside, instead of being upset, was incredibly gracious. And there were so many teaching moments in there that by the end, she was able to write, but it took almost the entire semester for her to get it. Okay, so that's one example.
Were you able to connect with that student as to why they stuck with third and then eventually changed from third to second?
She just kept going back to the way that she viewed them from her father's perspective. Right. Which unfortunately is probably more the norm than the exception of officers seeing people inside as human beings who committed a mistake.
Right.
I can think of another example. This is also in the women's prison, where it was a high school student. It was not even a college student. And the high school student wanted to drop out because she had a very particular condition where she would pluck out her hair and her eyelashes and her eyebrows. Okay, you can't make this stuff up. I'd never heard of this before.
I have. I've forgotten the name, but I have heard of it. It's rare. It's very rare.
It's very rare.
Yeah.
The woman inside who she was partnered with suffered from it. And the connection that those two women, and you wouldn't have known it because the woman inside had a gorgeous, luscious, like long brown hair and very thick eyelashes. And she shared her experience of how she came through it. So that was another example. And then we had in the men's prison a man who used to be a principal, right? He committed a crime, a very bad crime, and had a life sentence. When I met him, he was a little overweight, not, one way or the other. And he was coming out of a very long depression. He used to weigh 500 some pounds. His partner, a UM student, wanted to drop out of school because he said he was depressed, and it had to do with his relationship with his father. So my student explained his own process of how he got to be where he was, feeling better about himself, losing the weight, he did drop out of school because of his father. And he said, I took the wrong path, and it's taken me a lifetime to get on the right path. And so that student stayed in school and ended up graduating.
Nice. I know, and you mentioned this about anonymity, and so I know that the program, for it to work, you have these, I hate to call them ground rules, but these structures in place, right? Anonymity is one of them. I think you said another one of them is they don't share, the prisoners don't share what they're in for. Were there cases of the students, one way or the other, especially I think you had a case where they eventually met each other. Were there cases where anybody just couldn't resist the urge to look something up and then had to kind of navigate that knowledge?
Yeah. So the reason we have the anonymity is so that everybody comes in on an equal playing field.
Right.
But the particular case was an exception when we were allowed to bring in the partners. And so they met for the first time. And this had to do with a student who was in a same-sex relationship, and his partner was killed in a drunk driving accident. He had an incredibly tight relationship with his writing partner who was at the women's prison. And so they got to meet at the graduation this one time. And he saw her name, and he went home and he looked her up. And she was in for having killed someone in a drunk driving accident. And he had to reconcile his feelings about the person who killed his partner and this woman who he knew as someone who was paying dearly for her crime,
Right.
and rethink his own relationship to what criminality is.
Right. Well, you know what's interesting about that example is it seems to me, this is me without knowing the individual, but it seems to me that he may not have even realized he was still carrying that. Like, he may have sort of kind of known it, because obviously if your partner is killed in a situation like that, you understand you're going to grieve for a while. But maybe you don't understand the particularities of your grief until you're put in a situation where you have to reconfront it. It'd just be interesting to hear how he worked through that, how that experience gave him an opportunity to re-engage that emotion in a slightly different way.
And I don't think it's a one-off.
Right.
We don't follow, or I don't follow, because I'm not a professor, so it's not my outside students. I follow my inside students. I think it happens a lot. We have two other opportunities to bring people inside. So one is we have prison visits. And for any of your listeners, you can go to our website and you can sign up. And it's
It'll be on our website.
It's an opportunity to go inside and sit and have a one-on-one conversation. And I can tell you without fail, every time the time is up when I have to tell the community members we have to go, there's this collective groan, because the opportunity is, first of all, just to sit with no devices and have a one-on-one conversation. All right, I'll give you an example. Last semester, we had 41 Swedish high school students who were here on a visit go inside for a graduation. And I talked to them when they were sitting outside, tall, blonde, college or high school kids. No one asked a question. They were totally quiet before we went in. I could not get them to leave. The connections that they made after the graduation, so that's the second way to go in, is to go to one of our graduations.
Right.
It defied every stereotype. And when I asked them what surprised them most about being in the States, this is hilarious, but they said they couldn't believe what bad conditions our buses were in.
They're not wrong. I've been to European buses. So just for our listeners, and I do want you to talk about this for a little bit. Every year, some of the prison writing classes produce pieces that end up in a journal, an annual journal called Don't Shake the Spoon. We are now on volume 4. It's called Don't Shake the Spoon, a journal of prison writing. You can get it on Amazon, right? But hopefully also your local bookstore as well. And directly from the website by chance?
Yeah, it'll go through Amazon because it's print on demand, but Books and Books has it in stock.
Yeah, Books and Books in Coral Gables and wherever Books and Books is located, which is now everywhere. But it's a beautiful book. I think, like Kathie said earlier, it's different kinds of writing, right? There's short stories, it's poetry, it's spoken word, there's kind of more oral styles. What about the professors who teach in this program? And I'm a professor myself, as you know. And professors are an interesting breed sometimes, right? In how we train to see the world. But you have several of them who volunteer and who are part of this, and I'm interested about the change process on them.
You know, Brian, I would be so remiss if I didn't give a huge shout out to the FIU professors. I mean, the professors from other universities too, but the professors at FIU have been stellar for the last 8 years in showing up. And I think you can ask anyone, and in fact, Michael Gillespie has put together a very short video of professors talking about their experience, which we'll also put up on your website. Yeah. I think to the person, they would say it is the most rewarding teaching experience. No stigma about FIU students, but every student who comes to our class has to go through so much to get there. Right? They have to get out of their dorm. They have to go through what's called the center gate. They have to get into the education building. And all of that may sound like just a simple walk, but trust me, it's not. And then they have to show up and they have to dig deep, which is what you referred to earlier. Yeah. So for the professor to have that kind of energy in a room, close reading on everything, deep conversations, the professors, I think, you know, if they could make a living at it, sorry, FIU, but they might walk away and teach full time for us. If only we had the same budget.
Yeah, we just don't, we don't talk enough in general about the ways in which teaching is enriching to the teacher as well.
This kind of experience has changed my life, and my life was fine before, but it's just gotten a whole lot better.
That's a good segue. So I want to hear about your life because, Exchange for Change is 10 years old. Let's start with what led to Exchange for Change.
So we have to go back a little bit. My career was as a journalist. I'd say I was a journalist for about 30 years. I would say I spent about 13 of those in Haiti. The first time I was there was 10 years.
And you lived there?
I lived there, yeah.
Where in Haiti?
In Port-au-Prince, in the capital, and I was a journalist, so I was pretty lucky. I got to travel all around the country and hear people's stories and report on really interesting, exciting, dangerous, confusing times.
So when did you first set up your home in Haiti? What year?
When I first started living there full-time was 1988.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm old. So I lived there from 88 to 98. I left suddenly because I had 2 kids at the time. I was held up at gunpoint for the 3rd time. It seemed irresponsible to stay because of my reaction to the 3rd time. So we came to Miami, and I continued to work as a journalist.
Did you still go back and forth, though?
I said I never would, and within a year I was going back often. Up until, yes, I was going back often. And I, in some time in the beginning of the 2000s, I can't say exactly when, I was invited inside the women's prison to see a dance performance.
In Miami?
In Miami, the women's prison in Homestead. And it really impacted me because I kind of looked around and I'm like, that could be me. I mean, not really, but, they looked so not like what you see on TV, right? But it took me about another 7 or 8 years to get back there. And I got back there because I was tired of working as a journalist.
Got back to the prison?
Going back to the prison, yeah. I was working at the time for Time Magazine, not doing stories that were particularly interesting. So I went to the prison through this organization that had done the performance. And I said, hey, I have this love of Haiti. I have this skill in the language and the culture. I know how to write. Can I teach a writing course for the Haitian women who are incarcerated here? So we offered the course, and not enough Haitian women showed up, so I started to teach writing. So it's a long segue, but then I started in 2009. The earthquake, the first major earthquake happened in 2010, so I left.
Okay.
I went back to Haiti for another 3 years.
Okay. Like you lived there.
I lived there again, yeah. And what informed Exchange for Change happened during those 3 years. I had a Knight International Journalism Fellowship where I was training Haitian journalists in investigative reporting. But the truth is, the Haitian journalists were not interested in investigative reporting. They were interested in survival. The foreign community was interested because it was their dollars, right? But the Haitian journalists and the Haitian media owners weren't that interested because it was still really dangerous.
Right.
So when I came back and went back into the prisons, and I did that almost immediately, I realized that while my life had been turned totally upside down by everything that I'd experienced during the earthquake, I walk into this setting that seems really routine. I thought, okay, there is something that is different. It may not be on the surface, but if we start to dig, let's find out what that is and how can they tell their own story about the changes. And that really was the genesis of what eventually became Exchange for Change.
So let me go back to your initial Haiti years, because if you said it's 30, you would have spanned Baby Duck and Aristide.
I first went in 86, right after Aristide left.
Okay. When he left and went to South Africa.
No, when Duvalier, right after Duvalier left in 1986, that's when I went for the first time.
Okay.
But I'd been working.
And so you came in, and so Aristide came into power when you,
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to get the.
Well, actually, Aristide, it's not like a linear story.
I know.
So I was living in California. I was running a handicraft store.
Okay.
We were buying from third world countries. The one thing that Haiti had in abundance was handicrafts. So I thought, I'm going to take 3 months, leave my store with somebody else, go buy handicrafts in Haiti for my store. It was 1988. And it was within a day or two, one of the many coups that then followed. So I stopped buying handicrafts. I became a reporter. The 3 months turned into 10 years. That's how I ended up staying there for so long.
So was there, and just, me never obviously having been a journalist or a reporter, but as a news follower, as a reader, as especially you talk about investigative journalism and the ways in which you really have to get into the hearts and minds of people's stories and their experience. I just wonder if there's anything about that time in Haiti. I know the last 3 years is what really informed Exchange for Change, but the initial 27 years or however long it was there anything about living there, seeing the Haitian society deal with the international community, all of the struggles, all of the political issues? Did any of that kind of teach you about sort of humanity in general, right? Almost like a 30,000-foot kind of view of it, that then came to inform your curriculum and how you think about the prison population.
100%. And it's not the kind of thing where you can sort of point to one episode, right?
Right.
But I do remember when we left Haiti the first time I left Haiti with my kids, I said to them, if you ever forget what it's like to turn on a light and be grateful, I'm shipping you back to Port-au-Prince, right? Because we take so much for granted.
Yeah.
And I think when you live in a country that is almost always referred to as the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere.
It's the first sentence
right?
of every. It always crushes me. Like, why must you do that?
And the editors always want you to put it in, right?
Oh,
and
really?
it just feels so demeaning because it's a full country. People get up in the morning and they get dressed and they go to work or they go to school or they figure out how to eat, right? That it's these individual stories that make up a country. And it's so easy for us to do this broad sweep.
Right.
Which is the same in the prison, right? They're all criminals.
Yeah.
They all committed a crime. No, it is a school of individuals all trying to educate themselves in whatever capacity they can. And that's the humanity that over the years, as I said, I don't think it's one thing, but I think it's years and years and years of it, that these are individual stories.
Yeah.
And they deserve to be told by the people who are affected by them, not by us.
Yeah, I mean, I try to think about it like, so I think the audience knows by now because I keep saying Eva Masai, our producer, is Haitian. Grew up in Haiti, born in Haiti. His mom still lives there. My brother-in-law is Haitian. He actually came to the U.S. I think as a college student. And I just find it interesting. And I'm an immigrant as well, right? I'm from Trinidad. We're not in the news as much as other countries. But as somebody myself who's never been to Haiti, if all I have is these articles that are printed, you would sort of think the whole island is just on fire, right? and I know, I think I kind of read enough, and I have people who still go back and forth, and they know a lot of the danger right now might be concentrated around Port-au-Prince, but again, if that's the only picture that's being told, like it's hard for your brain to then think about, well, what's happening in the countryside? What's happening on the other coast? Like, what about people who are not in gangs, who are not, in government or in the police force, who are just, like you said, trying to eat and live a life? Tega's mother still lives there, right? So it's interesting how the narration of things can impact your perception of it, right? And I guess this is sort of your point about the prison population.
Yeah, it's very hard for me to talk about Haiti even now, because I thought it was at its lowest point so many times in the period that I lived there and covered it, and I think that was a walk in the park compared to where it is now. And decades later, just it's like a magnet, right? Part of it is self-created, but part of it is just such bad luck where it is geographically. Right, between the hurricanes and the devastation, and then cholera coming, and even historically,
UN peacekeeping.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Right, I know, right?
So, I think in the global picture, the opportunity to allow our students to have their own voice is something that I feel I sort of failed in Haiti, that I was not able to do it. And I think that probably also informed the structure of Exchange for Change. So, for example, in each prison where we work, we have an elected student leadership council body from their peers. I meet with them once a week. They work with the outside facilitator to make sure that everything is communicated in the way that it should be. They're kind of the eyes and ears. They help the students out. They help the outside facilitator with any logistics. They run our graduations. They take ownership. And if there's an issue that comes up, I ask them before I make any decision. And so I think had I not had that experience with the fellowship with the investigative journalism, I might not have seen the importance of that.
Why do you think you weren't able to do that in Haiti?
To tell their own voices?
Yeah.
Oh, God. I think maybe I wasn't, in terms of self-knowledge, understanding enough about my ability to do that as a journalist. I was always freelance, so I had to pitch stories. I had to sometimes swallow what I thought was the lead in order to get the story in the paper. I mean, I remember I worked mostly for the Christian Science Monitor when I was just principally writing, and I had a fabulous, fabulous editor, and she granted me almost everything. But I remember one really heated discussion we had, and she just said, "Kathie, I can't go against what every other newspaper is saying." And I'm like, but I'm here. I can tell you what's happening. And I lost that one. So, there's some conventions that I just
couldn't circumscribe. So tell me a little bit about this essay you wrote. And I read it a couple of times. You called it A Long Walk. And it was, I know I'm turning the clock here. But it was a moving essay because, and just for viewers' knowledge, it's in an anthology, a book of short stories written by mostly Haitian writers and people of Haitian descent. See Edwidge Danticat had an essay in that as well. And in that short story, to the extent you remember all the details, that you kind of compared a journey that you took when you lived there and walking that same path. I think you had gone back right after the either the hurricane or the earthquake. I can't remember which one, but you had a friend. I think his name was
Sergo.
Sergo. Unfortunately, Sergo was alive, I believe, right? But the essay was like a kind of a comparison of two time periods, and I have to say there were times it felt like you checked just like you. There was a lot of reflection going on in the second walk. And you chose to share part of that reflection with your audience who read the book. But I felt there was more that you may have kind of kept for yourself. And maybe I was just imagining what I was like to have done that same distance over a 20-year span or whatever it was. Can you talk to us a little bit about that essay and what it was like going back to find your friend and go back after the earthquake?
It's like I'm going to get teary because I've totally forgotten this. I mean, there's a lot of history with Haiti that's still really painful, but I'm going to send this podcast to Sergo, who is now in the States, gainfully employed. Okay. He's able to support his family with the money that he's earning here.
Nice.
A victim of the current situation. His son got shot by a random bullet. His wife has not been able to stay in the neighborhood. He's come to the States, so that's a success story. Okay. But yeah. I don't think it's easy for someone who lives in this country that can put food on the table every day, even if it's not much, can really put themselves in a situation where everything is upside down and there is absolutely no certainty that tomorrow is going to be any better. And walking that, so I landed in Port-au-Prince the day after. The earthquake was on a Tuesday, and I landed on Wednesday with a television crew. There was no lights on the runway. We weren't sure we were able to land. I didn't know if my ex-husband was still alive or not. I'd left my son and my daughter back in the States, and I said, I'll let you know when I find out. But I had gotten a message to Sergo, my friend and my driver and my fixer, and I was fairly certain that in his neighborhood he would have been okay. And trying to find him that night, walking through the ruins and the dead bodies on the street and the destruction, I could say honestly for probably a week or so after that, I never wanted to go to sleep, Ryan, because I didn't want to close my eyes. I didn't want to see the things that I saw. Because you slept on
the tarmac, I think, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we slept on the tarmac. But, we'd walk by and people would be holding hands and singing. And the sense of community for those who were still standing upright and not wounded and not quite aware yet of everything that was about to unfold. That's Haiti, right? It's still there, maybe worse than ever before, but it's still there. There's 12 million people that are trying to live, and we have to recognize the humanity in each and every one of them.
Yeah. So I remember you started in the women's prison where you saw the dance performance, and you asked to work with the Haitian prisoners. What was that like? I mean, I know then you went back to Haiti for 3 years, but what was that kind of initial?
The first one? Oh, my God. Everything that I say that a college student is going to experience, I experienced it in 3D on 220 volts because I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I'd never been to a prison. First of all, I didn't know where Haiti was. Like all of these things were a series, it was a process. But I remember I had one student who was incredibly brave and responded to a prompt. And I don't remember what the prompt is, but I remember her story about her first gynecological exam and what she had to go through. And everyone in the class was dead silent, like they were completely hooked on her story. And I thought, you don't get honesty like this in any other classroom. And that turned the table. It's kind of what I was saying earlier about the trust. Like once the trust is developed, and all of my own stereotypes were being confronted right and left. And to be honest, they still are. I am, I think I'm a little bit more seasoned. I hope I am after 10 years. But still, the humanity that I see inside just absolutely blows me away. And I'm going to give you an example. So I ended up going over to the men's prison shortly after Exchange for Change was formed because of a separation with the original group that was doing the dance performance. And I had you sign an agreement with the Department of Corrections that says, if you hear that someone is going to do harm to themselves or others, you have to report it.
Right.
That's kind of, yeah. All right. So we had a student that didn't come to class. He clearly had some learning challenges. And I asked where he was, and somebody said, I think something might have happened to him. I said, if you can get to him, could you please ask him to come to class? So he came the next week, and he didn't want to talk about it, but it was clear that something had happened. So I called up a warden at another institution, and I said, I don't want to report this. And that warden said, you have to, because you don't want something else to happen to this person. Mm-hmm. So I called the institution. I reported it. The officers went to talk to him. He denied it. He didn't want to go to confinement.
So he did tell you what happened?
He didn't tell me, but he did not. I knew from others that it had happened. But he denied it to the officers because he didn't want to go to confinement. And they would have put him in confinement for his safety, but he didn't want to do it.
Right.
So when he came back the next week, some of the better writers in our class said, hey, we want to work with you on telling your story. And he ended up writing it, and he read it to the class the last day, and it was gut-wrenching. And then he just sat back and he smiled, like this smile that went from ear to ear, because he was so proud that he had the support and the strength, the inner strength to tell his story. Right. And to me, that's what Exchange for Change is all about.
Right. Yeah, I feel like I had to sit with that one for a while. And I mean, maybe that's a good opportunity to remind people to look out for Don't Shake the Spoon, Volume 4. There's 4 volumes out. And they're all people who had that kind of bravery to write that kind of story out. I want to ask one last question, which is, as you can tell the theme here, a bunch of questions folded into one. I am moved by the fact that you have college students, the Writing Exchange program, right? You have college students who are getting to see and experience humanity in this different way, right? But there is another part of my brain that is saying, but those things that those college students are experiencing during this process, I don't necessarily want them to just need a program like yours to experience what that is. And I'm saying that knowing that some of this stuff is kind of experiential, like there's no substitute, right, for talking to a prisoner, I think, right? But at the same time, I do wonder if quote unquote traditional college classrooms can do more to bring out some of the things that this writing program brings out. So is there something generative about your program that, people who teach, and whatever it is, right, whether it's biology or writing or law, whatever it is, that taps into something from their students beyond just their ability to answer questions in the discipline? Is my question making sense?
Yeah, it's such it's so deep, right? Because it goes on so many different levels. Because just like talking about Haiti, there's nothing like going to experience the poverty with the sights and the sounds and the smells. Mm-hmm. The same is true of walking into a prison system. But short of that, there's no lack of material, decent material, right? Mm-hmm. Not Hollywood material, but decent material that people can generate really interesting discussions. I mean, you can do the more traditional, taking a racial bias test or the Harvard, whatever all of those are, and
implicit project.
Talk about your responses. But there's lots of returning citizens in our community, and an opportunity to hear firsthand what their experience has been like and why having contact with the, quote, outside world, the free world, is so important in their own personal development so that they know that they can succeed. So if you, for example, have a business, the woman I told you who opened up her own store, she changed the policy at Dunkin' Donuts to look for formerly incarcerated people to hire, right? For us to start to understand that having a record doesn't have to work against you, it can work for you.
Yeah, there's a place I went to in, I want to say it was Lexington, Kentucky. I think that's where it was. It's called Deviate. And the entire staff are formerly incarcerated people. And I think they had about 2 or 3 branches across. It was a beautiful thing, man. It's I'm sure there are probably more of that around the country. I don't know how many, but it was nice to go there and see that. And
the Delancey Street started it, I think, out in California.
Okay.
I mean, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. We now have a restaurant called Irwin's that is entirely staffed by formerly incarcerated people.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to hear, right? Because in these dark times, sometimes it's nice to know that there are still good people, good systems, people trying to change perceptions out there.
And can I also say, find out who the FIU professors are who teach these classes and go talk to them. There are clubs that you can join. It's not the same thing, but if you're interested, there are so many opportunities out there to make an impact. And, you know, it's just one person sometimes. You just make some individual's life better. Sometimes, you know, that's more than we can ask for.
Right. So when next you going back to Haiti?
Oh, goodness.
I know it's rough right now.
To be honest, Brian, with the work that I'm doing inside takes up all of my extra, if I have any at this age, bandwidth, is I don't know if I have the stomach right now to see the conditions in Haiti, although I still have lots of friends there.
Yeah. Well, Kathie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really appreciate it. Knowledge Unbound is brought to you by the Rios Institute for Racially Just, Inclusive, Open STEM Education. We are generously funded by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Knowledge Unbound is produced by computer engineering major, class of 2005. It's a Segev Amasai.
Add 20 years to that. You just said 2005.
Did I say that?
Yeah, you did. we do.
No, I don't redoing that. We're keeping that 2025. But this is just my wish for you that, you know, you're 20 years computer engineer. That's all that is.
You know what? I'll take it as is.
Segev, what do you thought of that episode?
You know, from someone, and I'd like to make a slight correction throughout the episode. I was born in New York, but never really lived there. I moved back to Haiti in 2005. And, you know, growing up there, I think really shaped me as a person. You know, I wouldn't really consider myself privileged by any means, but I felt, you know, looking back, I definitely did like feel how most people like generally live their lives and how grateful they could be for like whatever they had. And, you know, looking back, especially with what happened in 2010 with the earthquake and several other instances of political and economic turmoil that started piling up like around, I want to say like 2017, 18, 19, around that time period. And I remember just, you know, wanting some change in my life. I was working retail at one of the biggest
in Port-au-Prince.
Yes, yeah, in Port-au-Prince. You know, before coming to FIU, and you know, especially with how things are going on right now, like people will say all kinds of things about Haiti. Is like, oh, like I don't know, it's so over for Haiti, as people usually tend to say. But it kind of, I want to say, it really does like break my heart to see Haiti in such a state, because I know like firsthand, there's like, it's a very like culturally rich country.
Yeah.
And not only that, but you know, I know Kathie said like she still has like friends and family in Haiti. Well, my mom is still in Haiti. Yeah, and you know, we do keep in touch.
And your mom's in Port-au-Prince specifically.
Yes, she's also
right?
in Port-au-Prince. She's also in Port-au-Prince. And
well, hey man, well, you know we love you, and you know you're part of our family here in the Seas program. Kathie, thanks so much for sharing your story with us, and I guess it kind of meant a lot to hear that story and knowing Segev's history, and of course, you know, we will always be supporters of the Exchange for Change program. Any final words?
No, I just am really grateful for the opportunity to share. And I'm so grateful to FIU on so many levels, and that you extended the invitation to me, Brian. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks for sticking with us for this episode. And I hope you learned a lot. I am always amazed at the different ways in which education can transform, it can heal. It does not limited to classroom credit. It's not limited to a subject. It's about interrogating who we are as humans and how much better we can always be. Thanks as always for listening. We'll see you next week. And don't forget, please be excellent to each other.
You know, we'd walk by and people would be holding hands and singing. And the sense of community for those who were still standing upright and not wounded and not quite aware yet of everything that was about to unfold. That's Haiti, right? It's still there, maybe worse than ever before, but it's still there. There's 12 million people that are trying to live, and we have to recognize the humanity in each and every one of them.